more detail compared to the first one, and of course sharing a lot more in terms of what financial wellness means. So I hope you've prepared with hard questions and a lot more for an engaging conversation. So just before we get started, I think let's try to get to know each other. I can see we're about 11 people so far. So I just want to ask that we get to know each other, and preferably on 4 things. I'm just getting the screen up. So first one is just a bit about yourself, what you do. Feel free to share as much as you want or as little as you want. There's no specific one. And then what you love doing, even if you're not being paid to do it. And lastly, what you're looking forward to in this course. So I think I could get started. So first is myself, my name is Michael. I am trying out something new with Growzania. So thank you very much for everyone who's joining us. It's basically linked to what I really enjoy doing, which is helping people solve problems, and that's why I'm here. So what I do for a living is I work at Unilever during the day, and so when I do have a bit of free time, this is what I enjoy doing, in as much as I'm not being paid to do it. So what I'm looking forward to in this course is to have an engaging and very candid conversation with everyone, and to get to know a lot more. As I always say, this journey is for you as much as it is for me as well. So that's me. Okay. So I am sharing my screen. Let me know if it's come up. Hopefully it should have come up. So let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see the screen.
Yeah, we can see.
Good. So welcome to today's course. Apologies, a bit of a technical hitch there, getting the screen to work. So welcome to today's course. So as I mentioned, today will be about personal financial wellness. It's a 4-week course, so about 1 or so hour every week. And this one goes in a bit more detail compared to what we did at the webinar, which was just really the top line level. So we'll go into a bit more detail, and also feel free to ask questions. Feel free to get to know each other. Feel free to share and ask those tough questions, because this session is for us to get as much as possible. So first things first, so who am I? So my name is Michael, the trainer here, and like I said, I'm starting off something new. So thank you very much for everyone who's joining us and working with us on this journey. So how does the course look like? So it's basically a 4-week course, starting off with today, where we'll go through some fundamentals. I've tried to make it as exciting as possible, so hopefully you'll enjoy. And then we'll also go through budgeting and why budgeting is important. Then on the second week, we'll look at savings, building and controlling debt. And then the third week will be about investment. And then the last week, we'll talk about how to protect your wealth, and some final tips of how to get towards financial independence. So let's start off with some house rules. So less house rules, more just some guidelines. So feel free to ask questions. Feel free to stop me. Whatever you want to understand, please feel free to ask. This is meant to be an interactive session. Like I said, let's get to know each other. And at the same time, as much as possible, what happens here, let's try and keep it here so that people feel free to share and ask those tough questions for each other. Again, I like saying there's nothing like a stupid question. If you're possibly thinking it in your head, somebody else is thinking it as well. So feel free to ask that question. We've already done the introduction. We've gotten to know each other. So we'll skip this one. So I think the first bit is, why are we here? So, if you think about it, we all want to build our wealth. And we do this by understanding the concept of cash and credit, which is basically around debt. But there's also deeper reasons why we want to do this. And the first one is that we definitely want to have to take some time off, maybe not now, but in the future. We want, say, for example, if you're young, if you get children, you want to be able to not necessarily have a high pumping career at that point. Or sometimes you even want to take a break. Could be a holiday, could be some time off from your career, and you want to be able to do that. So the second thing is that we want to achieve our financial goals, which could include buying a home or building one, depending on which inclination you are. It could also mean you want to further your education, you want to holiday, you want to enjoy a bit of life, and all that is the reason why we are here. There's also the bit about having something for a rainy day. It's very easy for us to not count for rainy days, but rainy days always happen. So, part of the reason why we are here is we want to make sure that when a rainy day does come, we've basically planned for it. And lastly, we want to retire early. I'm sure nobody is here seated and thinking, because I'm assuming we are all young, nobody is seated here and thinking they want to work until the day they clock 60. I believe we all want at some point to call it quit and say, what I've made so far should be able to sustain me till I grow much older. So those are some of the reasons why we are here. So for today's session, like I mentioned, we'll go through the fundamentals. This is about time value of money, about compounding interest, and calculating your net worth. And then we'll talk a bit about budgeting as well. We'll talk about the importance of financial goals, how to create your budget using some ideals, some tips on how to stick to your budget, and lastly about cash management. So to start off on time value of money. So what does that mean? It basically means that the purchasing power of money differs as time goes. So 1 shilling today will not necessarily be 1 shilling next year. And we see that in every day, we see that in our spending. If you think about how much you used to buy tomatoes 5 years ago versus how much you buy tomatoes now, of course, there is the impact of tomatoes becoming more expensive, but all that is about the time value of money in most of the situations. Secondly, also, if you save money today, and you do the right thing, put it in the right account where it earns interest, it will have a future value that will be higher than today's value. In borrowing as well, an example which is common to many people, for you to enjoy the benefits of a car today, you end up borrowing money and you repay it slowly in the future. So that's also an effect of time value of money, where you do take somebody else gives you the money for you to enjoy the car today. Or let's say, for example, if it's a house you're building, they give you the money for you to build the car today rather than you saving your money to get to that lump sum that you need. And then lastly, in investing, investing money will always result in maximizing the value of any of your surplus cash. And this also we see it as an impact of time value of money. But rather than talking about it in a lot of detail, I'll do some examples, and then you can basically bring the concept a bit closer. So why is it important for us to understand the time value of money? It's because, number one, you're not certain about tomorrow. So you can control your spending today and how you invest today, but you cannot control what happens tomorrow. You're not sure what will happen. So it's important for us to control our spending today and understand that money today has more value than it is tomorrow. Then secondly, there's inflation. Sometimes if you hear in the news, you'd always talk about, you'll always hear the government announcing that inflation is at 5%, X%. And that's because money that you receive today is more useful than money that you receive in the future. There's a famous English proverb that says, a bird in hand is always worth two in the bush. So this really applies so much when you think about the time value of money. Then the third thing is that there's the factor of interest. When when you have a certain amount that you receive today, say for example, it's for a car loan, you receive 1 million today and pay it at a later date. Of course, the money that you pay back to the bank will not be the same 1 million. You might pay it in small installments, but that's the reason why they require you to pay them back more than the 1 million, because they've already factored in the time value of money. So let's bring it home a bit with a good example. So the example that we're going to be using is something that I believe we've seen several times. Just seeing that the screen has not changed. So give me 1 second while I try to check what could be the issue. Sorry guys, sometimes these technical hitches happen when you don't necessarily want them to. So let me share my screen again so that you can be able to see. Okay, so hoping it has come back for everybody. Please let me know if it's back.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so thank you for that feedback. So the example I wanted to use is this one. I believe we've seen it or something similar to this, where you find a circular of a newspaper cut for many years ago is shared. And what you see is in this example, I want us to focus on toilet roll because this year toilet paper has become very interesting and really lit up the news. So when you think about toilet rolls, at that point, a toilet roll used to go for about 4 shillings. And you can even see there that there was a limit of 10 per customer. So the same shortages of toilet rolls, not that they started just recently, they used to be there even back in 1991. So a lot of times when people see this, what they say is that life was so cheap back then. Let's go back to that life because life was so cheap. But let's try and understand this a bit more. So a toilet roll, yes, used to retail at 4 shillings, and today the same toilet roll goes for between 20 and 30 shillings. That's about a 5 to 6 time increase in the price. But this would be only just satisfactory to say that the increase is that big if we assumed that 1 shilling today is the same as 1 shilling in 1991. But we know for a fact that people's incomes have risen. If you think about how much you earn today versus how much our parents earned versus how much our grandparents earned, of course, the incomes have risen. And at the same time, our economy is not the same. More roads have been constructed, more houses have come up. So, of course, the economy has also become better. So once we factor in the time value of money, and without going into too many calculations, what we find is that our economy has had an inflation of about 4 to 6%. And when you compound this 4 to 6% over the 20, almost 30 years between 1991 and today, what you find is that for the same toilet roll that was 4 shillings at that point, you actually paying between 20 and 30 today is actually the same amount, just that because of the time value of time, that's why the amount has become bigger, but you're really just paying the same amount for the toilet roll back then as it was today. Okay, so the time value of money is about understanding the present value and understanding the future value of money. So if you're trying to move from the present value of money into the future, that's what is called compounding. And if you're trying to move backwards, it's called discounting. So to give you an example, when a bank gives you money today, they load interest to it, and that's why they require you to pay more than what you borrowed. And that's because they're basically applying compounding. If you're trying to say in the next 5 years, I want to have 1 million shillings, and you're trying to work backwards, then you're trying to say, how much do you need to save now for you to have 1 million in the next 5 years? And that math in that particular situation would be called discounting. And the difference between present value and future value, of course, is just the time that you put in. So I don't know if there's any questions on the time value of money, or if you're happy for us to proceed to compound interest.
It's clear for me.
Okay, thanks. All right, so if there's no question, we'll go to compound interest. And again, trying to use similar good examples for us to bring the concepts home. So for us to understand compound interest, so the first thing is that there's a famous quote by Albert Einstein many years ago, who said that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pays it. So if you understand compound interest, you save money and therefore you earn the interest. If you don't understand, then you borrow the money and then you end up paying compound interest to a bank. And that's because the bank understands compound interest, and that's why they earn it as an income for themselves. So again, same thing, same chart we were talking with, looking at time value of money is the same thing when we're looking at compound interest, because we're basically trying to move from present value of a shilling into the future value, and we're basically doing what is called compounding. So the brilliant thing about compound interest, and which is what we are really trying to achieve, is that you're trying to have money which could be a small pot of money today, and you want that small pot to earn interest, so it becomes a slightly bigger pot, and then this interest that has earned together with the money that you had initially earns even more interest, and that is what really is the power of compounding interest, and we'll look at examples on it. So I want us to use this example where we have two ladies, one called Jane, one called Joy. So Jane is 21 years. She gets her first job. She starts saving about 20,000 per year for 10 years. Then at the age of 31, she gets her family and she's unable to continue saving. So she stops saving, but she lets her savings sit until she's 55 years old. And then on the other hand, we have a lady called Joy, who's about 21 years. She gets her first job, but she decides to wait until later for her to start saving. When she gets to the age of 35, she realizes that retirement is coming, and she starts saving about 20,000 per year till she's 55 years. So who of the two do you think will have more money at the age of 55? Is it Jane or is it Joy? Just a quick question.
Jane.
Sorry, Jane?
Jane.
Okay.
Jane.
Jane? Okay. Anybody with a different answer? Okay. So if you're saying Jane, why do you think Jane will have more money?
I'm thinking more of because she started saving earlier, so the amount of savings has been earning interest every year on top of interest on top of interest. So that's practically she saved for, that's 55 minus 21 years, like 34 years.
Yeah.
Compared to Joy, who saved for only 20 years. But she started at 35.
Yes, I really like that. And let's look at it in more detail. So spot on in terms of the power of compounding and the way you've really talked about it. So if you look at Jen, so she's saved about 20,000 for 10 years, which is about 200,000. This means that her initial savings after the 10 years, what she's actually put in on her own is 200. What she's earned as interest is about 125K, which is 325. So at the end of 10 years, she has 325K. Then she lets this compound till she gets to 55. And this is where the magic really happens, where you find that the interest that she earns for the next 24 years is about 2.4 million. And by the time she gets to 55, she'll have 2.6 million shillings. So you can see that's a really awesome amount for just saving 200,000. And then Lady Joy, on the other hand, so she waited for 10 years. So for the first 10 years, all she had was zero. And then when she got to 35, she realized that, you know what, she needs to start saving. So she now started putting 20,000 aside for 25 years. And that means she put aside 500,000 of her own money. The interest that she earned, assuming that she put it in account that earns about 8.7% per year, is about 1.3 million. And basically that means she ends up with 1.76 million. So if we look at the two ladies side by side, you find that the power of compounding, and this is why it's important for us to start early, is really, really high, especially the longer you wait to start, the more you really have to save for you to come out on the upper hand. So in this example, Joy might need to actually put aside almost 30 to 40,000 per year for her to reach the same levels as Jen did, and it's simply because Jen possibly figured out the power of compounding interest and decided to start saving earlier than Joy in this situation. Okay, so let's do one more example. I'm sure this one is familiar for everyone, and you've seen somebody who's done this. So, let's use an example of somebody called Jordan. About 25 years, he got his first job. He's heard that land is an ideal investment. So he's taken somewhere to Athi River. He pays about 500K for the land. And then when he turns 41, which is about 16 years later, he decides to sell the land for 1.5 million. And then he makes about 3 times on his money. And he's like, wow, this is very, very brilliant because I multiplied my money 3 times. Do you think this was a wise investment? And is there a possibility that he could have put the money somewhere else and gotten a better return? What do you think? There's no right or wrong answer, so don't be afraid to answer. It's just meant to be a conversation. Any thoughts? Okay, so I'm assuming then it looks as tricky as I expected it to be. So let's again go through the details. So Jordan basically put aside 500K, which was the initial cost of the land. The profit after he sold the land was about 1 million, which in this case would be somewhat like the interest he earned. Then he sold the land for 1.5 million, which is the future value that he had. So if you do take this and just assuming that it was compounding, what you find is that he's earned about 7.1% per year. On the other hand, if he had decided to put the money in an account that basically earned him slightly more interest, what would have happened is he would have had the same 500K and interest over 16 years, which would have been about 1.3 million. And he would have been slightly better off with about 1.9 million shillings, because the interest rate might have been about 8.7, which is on average what you could get from fairly stable investments like money markets. Okay. So I don't know if what you think about this. Is this shocking? Is this what you expected? I'm sure somebody has been in this situation where you see somebody buying land and selling it later for a lot of money, but no one ever goes back to check whether they really made a good kill on their investment, given the time value of money. Any thoughts, questions? Checking we're still together as well.
I had a question. You're saying that actually having savings is more profitable than shambal, but I find most institutions, as much as they say they give you the 10%, there are those deductions they do before you get your money back. By the time you get your money back, you find it's way lower than, or I think it depends, because also land can, depending on the area and the development, land can go even higher than expected. Not necessarily that savings can be necessarily higher than. Because there are places I've seen, you went to see a land, it was almost 100,000, and coming maybe 10 years later is almost in millions, just because there's a building nearby or a shopping center with development. So I think it's a balance between, it's a risk, it's not like something you're sure of. Okay, you might be sure of savings you can get in the next few years, but in terms of land, there are also additional costs that may come through as well, or you can get extra profit.
Yeah, I think spot on, because there's two things that you mentioned there that are really important. So yes, there's the situations where the figures are actually much higher and you do get a much bigger profit. So this example was intentionally set to kind of be on the lower side, just because it was more to bring up the question of saying, how well do you evaluate that investment? So rather than just saying that you made 3 times or 10 times your money, then factoring in the time value of money is important for us to then understand. You know, if you say it's 10 times and maybe that's over 20 years, then you might find that, you know, you've really not made such a big kill. But and that's why it's important for us to understand that, because it will then help you to know, you know, do you then hold on a bit more, or do you then sell it and maybe say, okay, I could have gotten something better somewhere else, so next time if I have this kind of money, I'll put it somewhere else rather than putting it here. But then in next week's class where we talk about savings, so we'll be able to go through in a bit more detail about how you can be able to save and get this kind of interest rates that are really good and secure. So there's also the part of risk reward. So of course, I'm guessing a lot of people would be on the cautious side. So there's of course a lot of cautious aspects and making sure that you don't lose your money. So we'll talk about that and some of those saving tools. But yeah, you're right. Some of the land investments could actually make you a lot more than what you're making from elsewhere. And then I'm seeing Caroline as well saying she's completely shocked by the figures. Yeah, so thank you for that. It was intentionally made to be that way. So that's why I'm kind of asking the question, please make sure you evaluate all your investments and not just say you really made 3 times or 10 times the money. Okay, so the next bit is on personal net worth. So the personal net worth, this is the most important figure that if you really want to assess yourself, this is the most important figure for you to keep an eye on every day. So
We are losing you. I don't know what's wrong with the connection, or it's on my end.
Sorry about that. Is everyone else okay, or is it my connection on my side?
Can hear you from our end.
I can hear you.
All right. Okay, so I'll continue. So the most important figure, as I was saying, is your personal net worth. And how you basically calculate it is you take what is your assets, you deduct what is your liabilities, and then that gives you what your personal net worth is. And I really want to challenge you for you to do this. You don't have to report what the figure is, but I'm sure you'll be completely shocked if you actually try and do this calculation. So when you look at your assets, what should you put there? You should put what you own. So this is physical assets like your land, your car, laptop, if you have one, if you have a phone, if you have a tablet, you can put all those in there. You know, you put in liquid assets like any cash you have that could be in the bank or M-Pesa or Mshwari, wherever the money is, put in those liquid assets. And then put in your invested assets as well. This could be your fixed deposit, could be your savings accounts, or anything else. In terms of liabilities, what should you put there? You should put any delayed expenses, for example, rent. If you have any rent overdues or any money that you owe a friend or something like that, put it inside your liabilities. If you have any other bigger loans, like maybe you have a car loan, you have a student loan, put it there on the other side. And then if you have any long-term liabilities, you could have a mortgage, you know, you could have a house loan or something like that. So put them in and then use that to then calculate what your personal net worth is. And the simple thing that we're trying to do for everyone is we're trying to make sure that our personal net worth is becoming as high as possible. And we'll go through a few examples of how you could impact it both positively, make it increase, or negatively by making it reduce. So what should you not include? Do not include any of your assets that don't necessarily have a future value. This could be examples like your clothes. So for you, unless it's a very expensive piece of cloth, chances are it will be sold for peanuts if you try to sell it. And then you could be well educated, have a master's, have a degree, have a PhD, but it's very hard to put a value on that. So you can't really put it under assets, because how do you really qualify your education into a value? And then another thing not to put there is, do not put your salary, because your salary is not an asset, your salary is an income. So today it could be there, tomorrow it could not be there. So you need not put it under your assets. It's not necessarily part of your assets. So I really want to challenge everyone, please do this. You don't need to tell anyone what the figure is, but I'm sure you'll have a big shock once you realize that's what you really are worth, and that's your personal net worth. Okay, so how does your net worth change? Yep, Winnie, do you want to ask something? Okay, so let's continue. So how does your net worth change? So let's assume you buy a car and you pay it out in cash. What do you think happens to your net worth? Does it increase? Does it reduce? Or does it stay the same? Anybody with any thoughts?
I'm thinking it stays the same.
You're thinking it stays the same? Anybody with a different thinking? Okay. So in this particular situation, what happens is it could either increase or it could stay the same, because depending on how well the deal is, or how you struck the deal on the car, you could buy a car that's valued at $1 million for 900K, which of course would increase your personal net worth. But if you buy a car that is priced at $1 million, and you pay $1 million for it, then of course it stays the same. So let's take a second example where you buy a car on 100% loan. So what happens in this situation? So you've gone to the bank, you've borrowed a loan at 100%. The car is valued at 1 million, you've borrowed 1 million. What happens to your personal net worth? Yes, Lona?
Okay, I think it decreases.
Okay, I think it decreases. Mutavuta, I can see you've unmuted as well.
Decreases.
Decreases. Okay, so yes, it could either decrease or stay the same. In this particular example, it stays the same because you bought a car that's valued at 1 million, you borrowed 1 million for the bank. So your assets have gone up by 1 million, but then your liabilities have gone down, have also increased by 1 million. So net, the effect is zero. So here is another
Question.
Yes, Caroline?
But when you take a loan, does the interest not start immediately? Because you've taken a 1 million loan, even if you stay 1 month, it's already charging you interest. So you'll be actually, you started the journey of paying more than the value of what you bought. Or
Yes. So I think you're right. But then the amount that is due to the bank will never be higher than your principal. So because usually what the bank does is they calculate the interest on a reducing balance. So in as much as yes, you're already being charged interest, the reason why they give you that grace period, it's not because they're very nice, it's because they cannot charge you. Your loan can never be higher than what you borrowed. So if you borrowed 1 million, you can never owe them as a lump sum more than the 1 million. So that's why they really can't do that. And that's why it stays the same. I hope that makes sense.
okay, okay, a bit, but usually I'm looking at in the terms of when you finish the loan, when you calculate how many payments you've done at the end of the
Yes.
loan, it's not, yeah, that would be different. But I know the loan, at least the loan amount stays the same.
Yeah, so absolutely. So I think you've also brought up something. I had intentionally stayed away from it here, but yeah, you brought up something very interesting, because a car is usually a depreciating value, depreciating asset, sorry, and then your loan will have increased because you'll have paid the bank a lot more. So yes, in net, you'll have, your net worth will have decreased because your asset today, you could have bought it for $1 million. By the time you finish paying the bank 4 years later, it will be worth less than $1 million. And we'll go through that in detail when we look at car loans as in the debt section. But then, yeah, you're spot on that. Okay, so the third one is that you take out, this is very common for everybody. You either do a digital loan, the likes of Branch, Tala, whatever it is, or you do Fuliza, or you take any kind of an unsecured loan. What happens to your net worth? Does it increase, does it reduce, or does it stay the same?
Okay. I don't want to answer directly, but I could say that depending on what you use the loan for, your value could either decrease or increase.
Brilliant. So you're absolutely right. If you use it to say, for example, secure some land, then of course it could remain the same, increase or reduce in case you don't do the right valuation. So in this example, the most likely situation for most people is that the value usually ends up decreasing, because a lot of times this, I can give you a very simple statistic for Branch and Tala. What they found is that the highest number of requests that they were getting for people applying for those digital loans was actually between midnight and 3 a.m. So this was usually people who are in a bar. You've really run out of the money that you had planned to spend, but you're out with your friends and you don't want to be left out. You don't want that feeling of FOMO. So what happens is you have to secure a different source for you to be able to fund it. So in this particular situation, yes, it could increase depending on what you do with the loan. It could reduce, but in most situations, what usually happens is that it reduces. Okay, so what happens if you get a better paying job or your salary increases? So what happens to your net worth if you get a better paying job or your salary increases? Yes, Lona?
Okay, it stays the same. Si tumesema salary si asset, or there's some people with a better salary, they'll take a higher loan for a better car. So yeah.
Yep, spot on. So in this particular situation, what could happen is that you could either stay the same, you could increase, you could decrease, depending on what you decide to do with the salary. So if you decide to use it to fund your lifestyle expenses, of course it will not help you as much. But if you do the right thing with it, then it will really help you. So sorry about that. I'm hoping the screen is back. Yeah, so depending on what you decide to do with the cash, then it could increase, stay the same, or reduce. Then the last example is you decide to buy some stocks. What do you think happens? So you look at the stock market, you decide to invest in KCB, Safaricom stocks. What do you think happens to your personal net worth?
It increases.
Okay. So yeah, so in this particular situation, again, it could increase or decrease given if you buy stocks that are on you've bought when the price was low and the stocks increase, then your net worth will increase. But if you buy stocks and then the values go down, then your net worth also decreases. So again, just showing you a few examples. It's not really day and night where you say, if you buy a car in cash today, tomorrow it will definitely increase. Of course, it will change depending on what's really happening. But that's why we're using these examples to show why it's important for us to focus on our net worth as an important figure. So just a quick recap. So in terms of time value of money, so what we find is that the value of money usually changes as time passes. When you're thinking about this, always remember that Ibrahim's example, where toilet paper used to be about 4 shillings back then, and now it's 20. It's nothing out of the ordinary. It's just what we would expect to happen as a result of the time value of money concept. Then in terms of compound interests, so remember what is really, really important is to start early. If you want to benefit from compounding, you're better off putting in small money today and increase it as you go, rather than waiting until later for you to start saving. And then lastly, in terms of your personal net worth, this is the most important figure for you to keep checking for yourself. Aim to have a positive personal net worth. and then different actions will impact your personal net worth differently. So just pause here in case there is any questions before we go to the second section on budgeting. So just checking if we have any questions, anything that's not clear.
Yes, I have a question about something you said about when you were talking about buying a loan, 100% loan to buy a car, and you said that you cannot pay the bank more than you borrowed. You said something like that.
Yes.
So can you be clear on that a bit more, because I didn't quite get what you meant.
No problem. So what I meant is, so assuming today you buy a car for 1 million and your loan that you take out is 1 million shillings. So by law, the interest that you pay back to the bank can never be higher than the 1 million that you took. So you can never pay the bank 1 million plus 1 million will basically be 2 million. So you cannot never pay the bank more than 2 million. So interest for today, interest for tomorrow, and all those things can never be more than that. So what I meant by that is, if you take out 1 million today, they usually don't start charging you interest immediately, because legally they have to let the first installment go through, so that the interest, so that the 1 million can at least reduce to say 950k. Again, just using a random figure. And then now they apply interest on the 950, so that they now start increasing what you owe to them higher. So it's a bit of a legal loophole, but that's the reason why banks usually give a payment, holiday. So they don't expect you to start paying them back immediately, because they have to let the principal reduce, then they start charging interest on it.
Oh, okay, fine. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, it's a bit clearer now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go to the second section on budgeting. So just in case there's any question, please feel free to stop me. Yeah. So the first one is, budgeting is very important for us, and it's a big part, especially if you want to set your financial goals. If you don't have the right budget, then it will be very hard for you to save. It will be very hard for you to know where your money is going, and it will be very hard for you to achieve any financial goals. So that's why it's important for us to go through budgeting, financial goals and budgeting together. So again, using some lady here, again, this is a drastic example, but just sharing it for us all to see. So we have a lady here called Janice, who is about 25 years old, and she loves snacking a lot. She always has a few snacks in her handbag. On average, she spends about 100 shillings each day on snacks. So what do you think happens in Janice's situation? So per day, she spends about 100 shillings on snacking. Per month, about 2.5. So let's assume it's not every day. It's about 25 days in a month that she's snacking, which means that every year she's spending about 30k on snacking. If she does this until she gets to 55, what happens is she's going to have spent about 900k on snacking. And in case she had invested this 100 shillings every day, which would be about 2,500 every month, she would have earned interest of about 3.4 million shillings. And after the 16 years, she would have basically had about 4.3 million shillings. But because she chose to have a snack every day, she's foregoing having 4.3 million by the time she's 55 years. Again, this example is again a bit drastic, and it's less about looking at the snacking and saying whether snacking is healthy or important or not, but it's about how even the smallest of things. So 100 bob a day can look like a small amount, but the fact that we do it over a long period of times, what happens is this could mean that you don't end up achieving your long-term goals, because that 4.3 million would have been a holiday she's foregoing by the time she decides to retire. So why do we need financial goals? So the first thing is, if you're not working towards something specific, you're less likely to know whether you should be spending more or less, or you're already spending more than you should really be spending. And then the second thing is, when you do come up short and you're, say for example, you need money for unexpected bills, and when you want to retire, you'll never know what you need to do for you to adjust. And that's why it's important for us, first thing, to set financial goals, and then second thing, for you to then start working towards those goals, because those two principles will be the ones that will really help you to really grow yourself. So another thing is, a lot of people right now, not only in Kenya but in the world, they're just one disaster away from being bankrupt. So we've seen with this COVID period, especially what has happened. A lot of people have lost their jobs. Of course, not because they did anything wrong, but because the companies were just not able to keep having them in their payroll and those kind of things. A lot of people end up having hospital bills that are related to this. You lose a family member, and also car accidents happen. So all these things could really mean that one disaster just happens and it screws up everything that you've really been working on. COVID comes, you lose your job, and at the end of it all, you really lose your footing and you lose everything that you are working on. Because if, say, for example, you had a car loan, maybe you've restructured it, but maybe at some point, things just don't go your way and it ends up going the other way. So this is why it's important for us to set financial goals, so that you make sure you're really not that one disaster away from being bankrupt. So another thing about setting financial goals is that it's the first step in the planning cycle. So we have to set goals, which means we write down the goals, not necessarily write, but just figure out what the goals are, and then you commit to them. Then the second thing is that you gather the information. So here you identify what your income is, what your expenses are, and you prioritize your expenses and categorize them. And we'll go through that in a bit more detail. Then from there, you write a budget, which means you plan ahead, you know where the money you're spending is going. Then you work out the plan. So your budget is your plan. So you then start executing it and going through it. So here is, it's important for you to stick to the budget and track your spending. Some months you'll be over, sometimes you'll be under, but by the mere fact of you following it through, you'll then be able to know where to adjust. And then you optimize it. Sometimes you'll get an increase on your income. Sometimes your landlord will say, I need you to pay more rent. Sometimes all those things happen. So you'll need to be able to tweak the plan as times go. But then it's a cycle where you have to keep checking your goals, putting the information together, tweaking your budget, and then working the plan. So in all that, where does a budget fit in terms of your financial goals? So a budget then helps us to make sure that, number one, we are living within our means. Fortunately or unfortunately, many people live outside their means. So what that means is, if they are earning 100,000, just throwing a figure, what happens is a lot of people are actually earning and living a life of somebody who's earning 150,000. So what they use to fund that is they usually consistently have loans. It could be in the form of school fees loans, could be in the form of a car loan, could be in the form of other unsecured loans, but they have all these loans because they want to keep portraying that lifestyle that they're of not necessarily what they're earning. Then the other thing that a budget helps us to do is that it helps us to defer money that we could use today to use it in the future. So a budget helps us to understand what is necessary, what is a need today versus what is a want, and for you to make those tough decisions and decide whether you want to spend it today or to use it to save for the future. So other softer things that a budget helps, of course, it helps us to reduce stress because you know where your money is going. I'm sure you've always had that feeling where you go to check how much money you had in your account and you're like, I thought I had more than this, because you've really not kept track of what happened. It helps you to see if you have extra cash or if you don't have enough money, and therefore you're able to adjust yourself beforehand. It helps you to see if money is going out or going in at the right time, because you're able to see when you usually get paid, and when your bills are due, for example, rent, your loan repayments and those kind of things. A budget helps you to see that. And it also helps you to prepare for occasional and seasonal expenses. So this could be, for example, school fees. This could be, for example, December, which is usually a big expenditure month for many people. It could be birthdays where you want to treat yourself. So a budget will help you prepare for all those kind of occasional expenses. So before you create your budget, what do you need to do? Number one is you need to identify your income. You need to identify your expenses, and then you need to prioritize your expenses. So in identifying your income, it's important for you to note all your income sources. This could be your salary, your bonus, any benefits you get from your employer. You could have a business that gives you some income, and you could also have some assets that you sell. Maybe this time around, you've decided to sell a handbag, to sell a phone. All those could be part of your income sources. Then in terms of expenses, usually these are fixed expenses, which could be rent, utilities, or debts. These ones don't usually change month on month. If your rent is 25, maybe once a year your landlord could be increasing it, but most of the time it remains roughly the same amount. Then you have variable expenses. These are like food, clothes, personal expenses or expenses related to stuff like going out, because it's not every time that you make your hair, in an expensive salon. Sometimes it costs you 2K, sometimes it costs you 5. So it's really variable as an expense. Food as well. Sometimes tomatoes are 3 for 20, sometimes they are 4 for 20. So, the cost of food will also vary. And then you have your yearly or your occasional expenses. Like I said, this could be birthdays, this could be your insurance, and this could be stuff like school fees. So what you need to do is you need to differentiate between needs and wants. And it's always a tough question when you tell somebody, is this a need versus is it a want? A lot of times people believe that what they need is a need, but it might very easily fall into a want, just that it's a strong want for you. So it's very important for you to take an objective view and decide on what's a need versus what is a want. You need to divide up your occasional expenses so that you spend roughly the same amount every month. If, say, for example, you have a child who you're paying for school fees is, let's say, for example, 15K, just using a random figure again. If you divide that by 3 months, which is usually the time in a term, what you find is that you're spending about 5K every month. And this is what you put in your budget as your monthly figure. And then lastly, you need to prioritize large fixed expenses. So many people actually do the other way around, where you prioritize food and clothes rather than prioritizing rent. But the ideal is for you to then prioritize your fixed expenses. Make sure that you have a roof over your head before you think about going out and making sure you have a good time for yourself. So the second part is, how do you then create a budget? And I just wanted to start with this quote that says that a budget is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. And that's why we are doing this budget, because we're trying to tell the money where to go rather than waiting to figure out where it went. So how do we create our budget? This is just a guideline and not necessarily what you need to work with as the strict figures. They could be plus or minus a few percentage points, but largely people usually stick to these percentages. So you spend about, first of all, spend 10% on savings. If I was just to ask you, you don't have to answer, but do you save about 10% of your salary? That could be something for you to then consider. How do you start working towards saving at least 10% of your salary? And like I showed earlier, it's important to start early. So the earlier you can start, the better. Then in terms of rent, about 30% should go to rent, 15% to transport, 15% to food, another 15% to, if you have a child or if you're furthering your education. And then the rest is about 7% for medical, and the rest are really small amounts, about 3% for clothing, 3% for your own personal expenses, which could be like going out. And then miscellaneous could be gifts that you give to your friends and the like, which would roughly work out to about 2,000. So again, this is just a guideline. It's not the exact amounts that you need to be working with, but try as much as possible to stick within this, because this is what usually most people try and work around when they're building their budgets. And of course, if you don't have a specific expense, like let's say, for example, you don't have a child and you don't have any educational expenses, you could decide to repurpose that and add it to savings. So rather than saving 10%, you could decide to save 25%. And of course, you'll come out way ahead compared to everyone else. So how do you track your expenditure and your budget? I really like this app. It's called Money Manager. If you want, you can download it. The reason why I like it is because first things first, it helps us to manage money around any cycle. So depending on when you're paid, so if you're paid on the 25th, then your money cycle is from the 25th to the 25th. If your employer always delays and pays you on the 10th, then your money cycle is from the 10th to the 10th. So it really helps you to then set when you want your money cycle to start. And it then manages for you from the time when you receive your salary, which would be the 10th, all the way till the next 10th that you get the money. And there's always the question of people thinking, okay, we usually paid late, our employer is always paid late. But the truth is, if your employer is paying you consistently late, let's say they're paying you on the 10th and they're consistently paying you on the 10th, then it's really the same 30 days between the 10th and the 10th. You're not any better off from somebody who's paid on the 25th. The only thing you need to do is to understand that money cycle and then work within it. So, you could tell your landlord, my employer always pays me on the 10th, so I can only pay on the 10th, and stick to your word and pay on the 10th, not necessarily wait till 15, but pay according to what your money cycle is. And then the app also allows you to automate your expenses. You can put in like the automated ones that you don't need to put every month, which could be like your rent. And there, say for example, if you have any deductions that are done directly from your account, so you can put those in and it will automate them. And then lastly, it helps you to also visualize where the money went. So it can do for you graphs, charts, and the like, which really help you to optimize your expenditure and see where you need to cut in order to increase your savings. So any thoughts before I go to the next part? Any questions? Okay, so assuming silence means we're together. Feel free to type also in the chat box if you have any questions. Yeah, feel free to type there as well. So in terms of what if you have a budget shortfall? So you do your budget, you come up with what your income is versus what your budget is, and you've really rationalized and taken out the wants, and you're just left with the needs, but you still have a shortfall in your budget. What do you do in that situation? So there's two things for you to consider. One could be to reduce your expenses, and then second thing could be to increase your income. So in reducing your expenses, it's simply called checking for leaks. So in this particular situation, you use your budget tracker, and then you use what we like to call the what if method to relook at your expenses. So you could ask yourself, what if we move to a smaller or a cheaper house? What if we didn't pay for the most expensive internet package and we downgraded? What if we switched from using from using prepaid where we buy scratch cards to using postpaid? And you'll get some good savings on some of these things that will really help you to cover the budget shortfall. But there's also situations where despite all this, you still end up with a shortfall anyway. So what you then need to do in that case is to increase your income. So you could decide to find a second job, which could be like maybe a weekend job or something that you help out somebody with. You could decide to start a business. Business is usually very tricky for many people. So the business that we usually advise people to start is any business that you don't need to put fixed expenses in. So don't start a business that requires you to pay rent and those kind of things, because whether you make money or not, you will be required to pay rent, which is usually very expensive. Then on the other side, you could decide to ask for a raise where you work. Of course, with all the caution, because asking for a raise could go then the other way. So you need to do it very cautiously. You could decide to find a better job that pays you better. If you live with a family member or a roommate, you could ask them to get a job and for them to chip into the expenses so that you're not necessarily carrying the burden on your own. You could switch to a bit of DIY. This is where you save money by cooking at home, repairing stuff for yourself, those kind of things. You could decide to sell stuff that you don't need from your house. And then lastly, you could invest in your own education. For example, take a degree, take a certificate course, or those kind of things, because your education could tomorrow help you to land a better job or for you to get a raise in your workplace. So those are just some of the ideas in case you have a budget shortfall and you need to figure out how to sort it out. So just last two bits before we close off today's session. So how to stick to your budget, and then lastly, how to manage your cash. So in how to stick to your budget, the simple thing I really want you to remember, and it comes from this quote, is that you try as much as possible not to spend anything except what you've written down in your budget. And if you have to spend something that's not in your budget, then you have to find what you're adjusting. So if you've decided you're going to spend 20K on rent and 10K on food, if all of a sudden you have to spend 15 on food, then you have to figure out where is that extra 5K coming from? Where are you adjusting? And please, 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 as much as possible, try not to cut it from savings, because the moment you cut savings, then you're really denying yourself that compound interest that will help you to grow. So how do you stick to your budget? So the first thing is very, very important. Differentiate needs and wants. Needs and wants. Secondly, is never spend more than what you have. Like I said, if you're spending more than what you have, then usually you have to finance the difference from somewhere, and that will mean you taking a debt. And most of the times, if you're living outside of your means, what happens is you will keep financing it using debt. And if you have to spend more than what you have, sometimes some months, life happens. Somebody gets sick, your friend gets a baby, and you have to basically adjust and buy them a gift. So if you have to do that, it's okay, but just figure out what you're going to cut in order to compensate. Then try as much as possible to make it a habit. Know where your money is going and stay conscious about it. So if you know for a fact that you're usually paid on the 10th, one piece of thing that you could do is on the 11th, on the 12th, you could decide to take out an hour of your time or 30 minutes, depending on how long it takes. Take out a piece of paper and just plan what you're going to do that month. Plan, when you're going to pay rent, when you're going to deposit money into your savings and all those kind of things. And then make it a habit for you to do that, because it will really help you a long way to manage your cash. Then lastly, reduce your cash by paying up your expenses earlier. This reduces temptation. So what this means is, if you're paid on let's say you're one of the people who's lucky enough to be paid early. So you're paid on the 25th, but rent is only due on the 5th. Rather than waiting to pay on the 5th, just pay the rent as soon as you get the money into your account. So if you're paid on the 25th, maybe on the 26th, on the 27th, depending on your schedule, just try and pay off the rent. What that will do for you is that if you had 100K in your account, and then you pay your fixed expenses, let's say you pay your rent, you buy your electricity tokens, you pay for water, you pay those kind of things, what will happen is all of a sudden you won't have a lot of money in your account. And there's always this feeling, especially when you have a lot of money, there's this feeling that you want to spend it. So you're kind of trying to reduce that temptation to spend it, and you're trying to stick as much as possible to the right amount. Okay. And then in terms of how to manage cash, so three things. So the first one I think I've already talked about, setting a monthly money date. So usually this should be right after payday. If you're paid on the 25th, have it on the 26th. It doesn't have to be like a proper date. It's just the time that you then sit to review what your budget is for that month. Usually your budget shouldn't change every month, but you just check if there's anything unusual that you need to plan for. You need to check if you're on track in terms of your saving goals and those kind of things. And if you have a partner, significant other, or you have a roommate who you live together, then you might want to include them when you're doing that planning for the month. Then secondly is to use your surplus to pay debt or save for the future. Any surplus that you have, please put it towards reducing your debt or saving for the future. Don't use it to fund, that now that you have a 5K surplus, you have 5K to treat people, you have 5K to drink more. Please don't do that. Then lastly, handle over expenditure cleverly. Here, if you spent too much last month, then you need to figure out what you will cut back on the next month so that you don't end up spending more every time. So that's why you have this money date to then check what really happened last month. Maybe you spent more, maybe you spent less. You then try and cut back and see how you need to tweak the plan. So we are actually at the end. So a quick recap. So number one, set your financial goals. Without goals, you will not know what you are aiming at. Then create your budget and stick to it. Like we said, identify your income, identify your expenses, create your budget. Aim to stick to your budget as much as possible. I've given you a few tips for how to stick to your budget. Then lastly, automate your money plan. So here I have a money date where you review and revise the plan, and then you make your budget part of your habits so that it becomes seamless what you're doing every time. Okay, so just ending with a bright quote. So one must look through the rain to see the rainbow. So if you want to see the end in terms of the financial goal, you must be willing to do this work. You must be willing to do the budget. You must be willing to start off the hard work today if you ever want to achieve your financial goals. And I think that's it from me for today. Looking forward to seeing you in next week's session where we go through savings and we go through debt. Okay, so any questions for today's session? Anything maybe you think we need to add? Yes, Caroline? I can see you've unmuted.
Yes, I would request that during the next session that you would recommend some of the institutions that has the plans like the ones you have screenshotted.
Do you mean for savings specifically?
Yes.
Okay, perfectly. So
and maybe the I hear there are usually deductions about tax. I don't know how it goes. Maybe you can give us an elaboration on the same.
No problem, I will do that. So it's actually the plan for next week's session. So we'll go through different savings tools. We'll look at savings accounts. We'll look at mutual funds, and we'll look at balance funds and money market. So we'll look at those in a bit more detail. So hopefully I should be able to answer your question in next week's session. Okay, so I'm seeing. Okay, you're welcome. I'm seeing Winnie saying, thank you very much for the session. Very enlightening. You're welcome. And he's saying, wow, such a session for sure. Budgeting is a discipline. Thank you. And then Mercy is saying the session has been awesome. Okay, Genevieve, you're saying you're really impressed. Wow. So thank you very much, everyone. Happy you enjoyed the session. Happy that it was an eye-opener for many of you. So we'll see you next Tuesday, same time. So we'll go through savings and debt, again with examples as well. So thank you very much and have a good evening.
You too.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good.